Hey everybody, we're here with Greg Lopez, our guest for today. This is the Stoic Fellowship podcast where we talk about running and participating in Stoic practice groups and the various benefits and challenges therein. We are lucky to have Greg with us today. He's a very expert and experienced person in the Stoicism space, and beyond his academic bona fides, he has been involved in running Stoic Camp and other Stoicism practice groups. So we're very eager to get his voice on how we can best do that and how we can help people in their Stoic practice. So thank you for joining us, Greg.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. Before we get too much into the content here, can you just tell people who aren't familiar with you a little bit of who you are and your background generally, and maybe especially in terms of organizing and hosting these Stoicism groups?
Sure. So I hope to be my background to be a bit of inspiration to others in a sense, because I'm not actually in academia proper, especially around philosophy. The only two courses I've taken in undergrad were in metaphysics and philosophy of science concerning actual philosophy proper. I've always had a kind of background interest in philosophy, but I became it's recognized by some people, I guess, in terms of like stoicism, because I just did things and learned on my own. And I think that other people can do it too. I just started New York City Stoics in 2013. And that came about because I was volunteering for an organization that taught cognitive behavioral techniques to people with addictive behaviors, Smart Recovery. And I became president of that organization. And I noticed the connection between a specific form of cognitive behavior therapy, known as rational motive behavior therapy, and Stoicism. And back in undergraduate, I took a year long mandatory humanities curriculum in Greek and Roman culture, and I read Seneca and heard of the guy, but I didn't really put him in context so much and didn't really understand what Stoicism was and how important philosophy was to the Greco Roman era. So when I discovered this connection between CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, and Stoicism, I was like, oh, wow, I forgot that philosophy can actually be useful as opposed to just impressing certain people at cocktail parties or whatever. And I was like, that interested me. So I took a look. And during the time, there were actually some people around the world who were looking at how to practice Stoicism in the modern era. And this was a little bit pre formation of the nonprofit Modern Stoicism, which is based out of the UK, and started the Stoic conference and stuff like that. So during that time, there were some people on Yahoo groups and things like that who were talking about practicing Stoicism, and they were quite learned. And there were a few people who even developed like a correspondence course that from the 90s that developed into a book. Keith Seddon and some others who were trying to practice Stoicism, but I after being enamored for the change in the internet to the social media era and being enamored for that for a while, I quickly kind of discovered the downsides of such communication. That in essence, it's really hard to communicate via text in social media to learn or practice anything stoicism wise. And I those media have their place, but I don't think that they're particularly useful for that use case. So I decided to found an in-person group in New York City in 2013, New York City Stoics. And the goal of that group was to just kind of learn the basics of Stoicism and started as a reading group. And I did that in part for selfish reasons, because overall, I knew that if I was semi accountable to other people and at least have a basic grasp of the material before going in, that I would get it down a bit more. And that seems to have worked. And so I've been running New York City Stoics now, and it's 11th year. And in the process, I picked up stuff. And during that time, Massimo Pigliucci, who I knew a little bit through previous encounters in the kind of skeptic community, came to my meetup, and we started collaborating ultimately. And that led to Stoic Camp New York, which we do once a year, and Upstate New York, which was founded off of Rob Coulter's model of Stoic Camp. Now I guess it's Stoic Camp Wyoming, since we do a couple of things, but I think he's the originator of that. And we came up with our first book, a handbook for new Stoics in the U.S., and Live Like a Stoic in the UK. And we're in the process of publishing our second book, which should be out later this year with Meredith Alexander Kunz.
Great. So I'm here with Kelly Rodriguez, who she and I are both members of the board of the Stoic Fellowship, as are you, Greg, and actually one of the co-founders of that. I guess just to kind of start off here, can you talk a little bit about the founding of the Stoic Fellowship, what motivated that? And I guess obviously it's meant to be a resource to facilitators of Stoas around the world, Stoic practice groups. What was sort of the original vision there, and how do you hope the facilitators and groups are utilizing the Stoic Fellowship currently?
Sure. So the Stoic Fellowship came about because two people reached out to me, one from Minnesota and one from Bay Area, California, who also established Stoic groups on the ground. And they just found New York City Stoics online, reached out and asked to maybe start forming a group to try to help other small groups grow. And this comes out of the idea, which I think a lot of us share, is that again, online presence helps to some degree, but at the end of the day, humans kind of do better in groups, in person, or at least streaming live for video, where you can actually have some form of conversation. And so we decided to make the Stoic Fellowship to try to encourage people and notify others who are looking for groups in their area, be a central place for that. And so the Stoic Fellowship doesn't we're not a franchise. You don't have to get the Stoic Fellowship brand and stuff. We're really just essentially a resource to list groups who are doing their own things. And we have some basic minimum requirements for being listed as part of the Stoic Fellowship, that you have to focus primarily on Stoicism. So you can't have a little bit of Stoicism, a little bit of romantic Nietzsche, a little bit of perennial philosophy, a little bit of this and that. It's primarily Stoicism, and also your group has to be all inclusive, so you can't turn away people on the basis of creed or anything else, and things like that. But besides that, people can kind of do what they want, and so our aim is to kind of let others know and hopefully be a central resource to find groups in their area that meet those criteria, and also to try to help people start and grow groups in their own area, or perhaps in their own region or language, which they can do via online live meetings for their region and time zone.
Great. And Kelly, do you want to ask Greg anything?
Sure, sure. Well, in line of what you were saying before, this freedom you give to groups of Stoicism, this is something every time I have the opportunity to thank you guys and thank the Stoic Fellowship, and you particularly, because you, in the beginning, when I started with Stoa Madrid, I felt that freedom, to imagine what a Stoa could be in this time, in modern times, or in contemporary times, and just simply go with it. There were no impositions, or so this is something I always like to bring up, so everybody knows it's not necessary to be a scholar, or to simply having the interest of practicing Stoicism, and bringing other people together. So that's my personal experience, and I want to thank you. And well, as a facilitator, you are a facilitator of many groups and you have a lot of experience. I always look up to you somehow since the beginning, and you helped me, when I had some doubts, or when I had some maybe existential doubts, or crisis, but, situations in the development of my group. Maybe I would like to ask you, well, in your experience, what are the most maybe effective ways to keep people engaged? Maybe in my case, for example, it hasn't been maybe a problem getting people engaged to the meetings, but in their own practice, I can see, and we all face that as facilitators and as practitioners of Stoicism, maybe keeping people practicing every day, or understanding the importance of every day, as Epictetus said, if you want to do something, make it a habit, right? Or make it into a habit. So how can we help as facilitators? What are the most effective ways you have encountered, or what maybe you're, putting in practice now to keep people, more engaged and more attentive or vigilant to their own practice? I don't know if you can tell us a little bit to the rest of the community. Thank you.
Sure. So I think it's to a decent extent an unsolved problem. So I can only speak with low certainty about that because it's not like I found the one cool trick to get people to be practicing Stoics. Although this is one of my kind of current crusades or my current view of Stoicism. I'm kind of waiting for the hype to die down a little bit so that then there'll be fewer people interested in Stoicism, but the few people who will be dedicated. And this has been a long-standing problem. Epictetus was famous in the discourses for telling his students, most of you were sent here, to be groomed to be Roman aristocrats or whatever, but most of you are really Epicureans at heart. And I would say that it's been a long-standing problem. I disagree that most people nowadays in like industrialized Western societies are Epicureans at heart, because that would require a drastic lifestyle change. I'd probably say they're more Cyrenaics at heart. But overall, Stoicism really isn't for everybody. And I think part of this is part of getting people to practice is first accepting the fact that some people don't want to practice Stoicism as a full philosophy. They're just there to get a little trick, in which case sometimes I cater to that, sometimes I don't, depending on the kind of meeting. And always kind of happy to pull people aside. And one of the things about facilitation that I picked up during my time volunteering for Smart Recovery too is like a lot of the times people are there to kind of deal with a certain psychological issue that is much better handled by a professional psychotherapist. I've never seen major issues, but I see some warning signs and I pull them aside and sometimes say, this isn't really like the forum for that. You're better off looking for a psychotherapist. I know some resources. If you need help, I can give it to you to kind of look things up and find somebody for yourself. But once you have that, there are some things that I found to be a little bit worthwhile so I've run a couple of kinds of groups in New York City Stoics over time. One of them is practice group, which is currently not ongoing, although I formed my own small private practice group kind of just for myself. But in the past, I've run a few different versions of practice groups. And they've changed in format, but one of the key features I started with and always continued was explicit dedication up front. So because I believe that if you dabble in Stoicism, you'll get nowhere. Another thing that also harkens back to Epictetus saying, like, if you strive for other things and Stoicism, you'll get neither particularly well. Either go and pursue external goods or go pursue Stoicism, but give it a good effort. So for my practice groups, they were year-long practice groups, and I required a year of attendance. They weren't just like, come when you want to. And I said that up front, and I also had some mechanisms in place to try to get people to attend. What I did was I had people lay a deposit down, and for each month they attended, they got a part of the deposit back. And then if they reached 10 out of 12 meetings for the 12 months we met, then they got their full deposit back. For people who couldn't afford it, they had a hard rule where if you miss your third meeting, you're out of the group and you're not welcome back. So it was somewhat strict. And I think that strictness may rub some people the wrong way, but at the same time, it helps self-select people who are willing to give some effort and has some reinforcement mechanisms in place. In addition to that, in terms of practice, once people are in the practice group, I talk about specific drills and ask people to have a couple of techniques that they find that works for them, depending on the circumstance. So for instance, just having an at-hand phrase that you can create yourself and tell yourself repeatedly, or if there's a specific issue that's that's in their life right now, kind of creating a small exercise to help drill that particular issue so that they become better over time. So a mix of looking at some of the exercises that exist and catering to people's needs, along with explicitly asking for dedication, and also making it a small group where people just sign up and they're in. Nobody can drift in and out, and nobody can join later. It is like, this is the course and we're sticking to it over the year. Another thing I found that is useful for that is that in practice groups, people will sometimes have to share personal experiences. So getting to know a group of people over time tends to be a bit more useful. But like I said before, it's a bit of an unsolved problem, and expect that a large portion of people who are interested in Stoicism are not interested in Stoic practice, at least as a way of life. They're maybe interested in a couple of techniques, but the interest will also come bundled along with a large amount of misunderstanding of Stoic theory. And while practice is most important, understanding the basics of the theory is essential, because otherwise you'll just not be practicing Stoicism because you don't really understand what Stoicism is.
Okay. Maybe just one more thing here. I see that maybe, and you have mentioned this in other meetings I have participated, like you have different groups, like maybe a group for beginners, and then if you have more knowledge and understand better the whole philosophy, you have like a more advanced group. So do you customize maybe the practices for each group, for example, or would you recommend maybe customizing the practices for different types of groups, for example?
I actually don't have much experience in that. So the practice group was meant to be beginners from the ground up for people who are dedicated. And people who came to the practice groups had some knowledge of Stoicism, although there was also a lot of misunderstanding along the way. So and then my other group, which is a non-practice group, has changed over time, and I'm still experimenting with it. So for the explicit practice groups, I've done a couple of different methods. The first time I tried it, it was kind of just a Stoic support group where I thought people would come, and since they're in Stoicism and they know a little bit about Stoicism, we'd be able to talk from things from a Stoic perspective. People as a whole really liked that format. However, it didn't suit my needs or goals. I missed the mark there because of the misunderstandings of Stoicism that were brought up. And I realized that people didn't quite have a firm grasp on the theory. And so for some people who are listening, maybe that's actually what you want to do, and you're okay that you're not doing firm Stoicism, but it became a little bit more of a self-help support group rather than Stoicism proper. So that didn't meet my needs, although that kind of stuff could meet yours, where you have a basic selection criteria, and have people come and then you get to know each other, but it's cool that you kind of don't necessarily drill practice Stoicism entirely. The second year, I made my own year-long curricula with handouts and specific like discussion questions and stuff where the theory was brought up and then practice was brought up later that follow the three disciplines. And I was pretty happy with that approach. And then the third year, a handbook for new Stoics came out, and we used that, and we met monthly while people were working through the book, and that worked well too. So personally, it depends on which way you want to go. If you want people to learn from the ground up, probably some theory is necessary early on, but I've never done particularly like beginner practice groups versus advanced people practice groups. I have brought up a bit of practice in my reading groups where we kind of meet in person and discuss and read certain things or topics. And the most recent thing I've been doing was just using the Enchiridion and going through step by step and having a general discussion meeting to get misunderstandings out of the way, and because people kind of like general discussion. So my current format for in-person meetings in New York is we sit down, have informal conversations about anything relevant to Stoicism. I do keep things on topic so people don't start just going on political tirades or talking about their pet thing. So it still has to be relevant to Stoicism, but it's a conversation, and that brings the strength of in-person communications, because online it's hard to have a conversation with more than 3, 4, maybe to 8 people, like mute and echo and dogs barking in the background. It's not the same dynamic. It's better than like online social media stuff, but it has its downfalls, online stuff. So in person, I want people to talk. An ideal in-person meeting for the first hour and a half of that meeting would be me not saying much at all because people are discussing stuff, and maybe poking in to just say, oh, actually, that's not what Stoicism says, and move it more toward something that's a little bit more orthodox, to borrow that term, in terms of Stoicism. But then I end with a reading of the Enchiridion, and I always frame it in terms of practice because each part of the Enchiridion is highly practicable. And so I give people suggested practices. And that's kind of my version of a beginner kind of practice thing, where people get a good amount of theory informally, try to get at people's misunderstandings, and then say, and here's a reading from Epictetus. Let's do a deep dive to really understand it. An analogy that I often use for the Enchiridion is like that it's not a great place to start Stoicism because it's like the pure form of Stoicism. I say like the discourses are like cocoa leaves, whereas encouraging is like pure cocaine. So it's powerful stuff, but it could really mess you up if you don't if you don't use it with care. So we only take one part of the Enchiridion each time and dig deep into what it really means, what theory it's referring to, all that stuff, and then give a practical takeaway in order to practice for the month if they find it useful.
Yeah, it's funny, like just to illustrate the point, as you were discussing the weaknesses of online discussions, I think the connection was sketching out a little bit. Hopefully, it sounded like we captured enough to understand what you were saying, though. But yeah, the irony was pretty thick on that. The You raised a couple things that are interesting to me. One, the idea of asking for greater commitment from members is interesting. I'd like to hear more of how that's gone for you, because I've kind of struggled with that same question with the group that I run here in Pittsburgh. Is, I've tried to make it uh, I guess low commitment is the wrong way of putting it, but I guess low pressure. And so where people can, if they have an interest, it's not like they've got to, join, sign on the dotted line to be able to attend, and that obviously people are busy and can't always make it, and there isn't some guilt or pressure about that. On the other hand, one kind of perhaps consequence of that is that our attendance has tended to be kind of low out of the number of people who are ostensibly part of the group, and has kind of slowly dwindled over time. And something I'm looking at trying how to address. And I've wondered if asking some kind of overt commitment might be a part of that, right? Because the intent here is a little more than just a book club you can dabble in, right? Like it's the intent is more of a, personal transformation type thing that requires effort. It's more like going to the gym. Either you are going frequently, or you're not really doing it. So how has that played out for you? And how much of do you think it is maybe a unique circumstance in your case to be able to ask that, since you are such an expert, New York is such a big city, like that you can ask more than maybe you could in a smaller city with a non-book authored expert as the facilitator?
Yeah, I haven't thought a lot about like my particular circumstance. I did the practice groups starting before the book. And so I think I'm trying to remember, it may have been even before I joined Modern Stoicism and helped or co ran the in person Stoicon in New York City in 2016. I think it was maybe roughly around that time. I don't remember. But I was doing the practice group beforehand. So part of it is like, I think, if I recall correctly, but don't hold me to it, some of my practice groups were before I was a book author and considered like more in the Stoic sphere to a decent degree. So that's not that I don't think people should take that as a barrier that you're not an expert. And I really am a big fan of the peer support model, where you're all, to borrow Seneca's phrasing, you're all sick people in patient beds trying to help other sick people, where people can kind of, you just provide the structure, but you're not going to necessarily have the answers. In terms of not necessarily knowing Stoic theory, you can possibly cure that by doing and starting a practice group or having a parallel reading group where you read through a basic Stoic text that is reliable. I generally do recommend non-primary sources to start, because you're going to miss so much stuff if you don't necessarily know what you're reading. Like I just ran Stoic Camp New York with Massimo Pigliucci, and our theme this year was Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and I ran a couple of sessions specifically pointing out and picking things that are a casual read would miss, such as like his heavy leaning on Heraclitean physics and what that entails and why that's a constant theme for him. And also, even though Marcus says he's bad at logic, and thank goodness he didn't spend too much time in dialectic, he specifically puts logical arguments and is practicing them in some of the meditations. And if you don't know what hypothetical syllogism is and some basics of modern propositional logic, which map on decently enough to ancient Stoic logic, you won't even see that. It'll just go over your head. So some basic stuff is necessary. So reading that kind of thing in parallel could be a way to kind of boost it up. Population density is a problem, and my go-to solution is to expand out to a time zone and do it online, because at least then you'll be able to get more. Pittsburgh probably is still may have enough interest, but that's an empirical question that you're in the better position to answer in your case. But the final piece of advice I would probably give is that small groups are fine. There's no need to spread the gospel. We don't have to have a Stoic St. Paul going around founding Stoic churches. I'm my personal take on like the Stoic Fellowship is I'd like more people to know about Stoic Fellowship and Stoicism in general, just so that it's an option on the table. But I have no interest in growing Stoicism. I don't care about that metric. And actually, I suspect that metric has a lot of downsides that I'd prefer it to not happen, or like happen, fizzle out, and then we can finally get on with doing stuff. And I've seen similar dynamics in other kinds of groups I've attended where there's large interest, but the more people, the more unlike what I want it to be, it is. And so therefore I wait for the tide to pass or form a small little group of my own. So that's kind of my spirit for New York City Stoics, and something that I've kind of done implicitly in I've made my reading groups a little hard. They're online, so you can access them, but I make them dry to a degree, partially because I'm interested in some academic aspects of Stoicism. And so our current reading is academic papers. And I don't have 60, 80, 100 people coming. I have like between 10 and 30, or like 8 and 30 sometimes. And I'm fine with that. It's actually better in my goal. But your goals may vary. If you want to grow and have more people know, you will probably have to cater to the people's interest as they come. And that's another kind of tip I give to beginner facilitators is do what you want to start, but also pay attention to what people are specifically interested in, and then you can shape the group as it goes.
Definitely. You mentioned the word metric, right? And I am sure there's a metric that maybe might interest you more than the metric of the size of a group. And is the, how my question is, and I've tried to put in practice some ways to measure the progress of a group and the progress of myself, in my practice. So maybe you have found some effective ways to measure the progress in Stoicism and the progress of the group. I don't know, some ways to measure how we are doing, some metrics maybe to reflect on.
Sure. So the group, it really depends on your goals. One thing I would recommend is like go into forming a group with kind of specific goals in mind. Because one of the reasons why the Stoic Fellowship is a loose organization that allows for people to do what they want is because I think we don't have best practices for doing Stoicism, practicing Stoicism, and running Stoic groups. And so it's better at that point in time, until we get a firm idea, if we ever do, of letting people do what they want. Because we don't have best practices even at a general level. Then there are regional and cultural specifics depending on where the people are, where different people want different things, and that's cool. So I think it's ideal to have different approaches for the reasons I just mentioned. In terms of progress of the group, that then goes back to your goals. So if you intentionally start a group with a specific set of goals in mind, that kind of gives you some metrics for progress. So my main thing, though I don't do formal tracking, I do on some aspects of life, but not this, is generally repeat attendees, and then my general impressions of how their knowledge has grown over time. That in general, like the main, like I hear people bringing up, oh, Epictetus says, kiss your child as if they're dying. That's awful. And why is Stoicism so awful? The less I hear stuff like that, the better I am. I think there's progress to be made. So the more progress is happening. But again, it really depends on your goals. And as you can kind of tell, my approach is probably not what a lot of people would say. A lot of people want their groups to grow and get better attendance and that kind of stuff. And that is fine. I'm not trying to poo-poo on that. I'm saying that my goals were a couple-fold, starting to get some dedicated people into Stoicism and have them keep on coming back. And that has succeeded to a degree. My secondary goal, which I also kind of recommend as a tip, is to be a little selfish and make a goal for yourself related to the group. So, like my main goal, one of my main goals when starting the group was to just get better at Stoicism, because I knew I would be accountable if I had to prepare ahead of time and present or run some kind of discussion group. And that seems to have been the case as well, because I got a little bit more into the Stoisphere and people seem to respect some basics of what I'm saying. So like that, as far as I can tell, it's hard for anybody to self-evaluate in that way, but I guess like I'm meeting that goal. So that is, so it seems like those goals are going. But again, if your goal is to grow the group, then it would be group attendance. If your goal is consistency, it would be like number of consistent members and things like that. Turning to the question of progress in Stoicism, that's a little more objective, and there are a few ways of managing it. So, in a handbook for new Stoics, Massimo and I created a short scale to measure your progress on the three disciplines, and that was actually tested during a Stoic weekend. It has okay properties, but it's not great, so it wouldn't pass muster for being a validated construct in a psychological study, but it's not bad. It's a good informal thing. And then I'm also been on the tangents of working on with a team that's trying to validate psychological metric system for how stoic somebody is, and it's called, the acronym is SABS, SABS, and stands for the Stoic Attitude and Behavior Scale. And we're in the process of publishing a first paper showing the metrics of that. And so you could actually take a version of the SABS and see how stoic you are, at least in the classical sense, over time. And you could also take other like general well-being metrics and see whether you feel better in certain ways through other kind of psychological instruments. Or you could just journal. You could keep it simple. Epictetus has an implicit recommendation to tally your emotions. If you have a problem, if your main problematic emotion or passion is anger, then he says, if you get angry every day and then you get angry every week, then that's progress. And then if you get angry once every 30 days, then praise the gods and make a sacrifice to Zeus, because that's amazing. So just seeing that kind of stuff could be progress. And I have a tally app on my phone for kind of tallying certain emotions. And that kind of helps things out. But also there's a technical difference between like pre-passions, the pre-emotions, and the actual emotions there. But you can kind of like see how you're doing. Another thing that you could do, which is a classical Stoic technique seen by Marcus Aurelius and suggested by Seneca, is journaling and taking like a kind of inventory of your day and seeing how things go. And I know some other practitioners I know of go back over their journals and like when they've been journaling for a while, they also go back like a year, say, and read the journaling around that time and see if there's any pattern. So you can journal and then go back and see how things have progressed and get a qualitative impression of how things are going. So in short, for goals or progress of groups, it depends on your goal for the group. But I do recommend setting out goals. Why are you forming a group in the first place? What do you want out of it? That implies what your goals can be and how you can measure progress. Then for your personal progress, you can just tally certain problematic emotions all the way to reading past journal entries, all the way to actually kind of taking these full-blown scales, which is like the most time-intensive and rigorous approach, but it may not be worthwhile. I personally don't do it. And also I personally disagree with some aspects of ancient Stoicism. And so if I measured poorly on some aspect of the Stoic attitudes and behavior scale, I'd be okay with that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned in terms of assessing the progress of a group, that, in a sense, we kind of don't have best practices yet in general in terms of how groups are run. And that's part of why there's this sort of lack of a top-down mandate from the Stoic Fellowship and the room for facilitators to kind of run their group as they see fit. On the other hand, it seems like ultimately it would make sense to share what is learned in that process, right? If different facilitators are trying different things, approaching it with different goals, and it'd be nice to start to bring together some sense of best practices, even if it's not, something strictly enforced, of course, but just, a learning process. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts about, for one, perhaps the person that's interested in starting a Stoic group or has recently done so and maybe isn't as, it's one thing to have your own goals and to have that kind of flexibility if you feel like you know what those goals should be. But if you really are just wanting to do it, but you're not sure how, and you really just want the guidance from past experience, like what you might say to someone in that position who isn't as self-directed about how exactly to run it. And then for people who've been running the groups, like what's the best way to, share notes and to learn from each other and to leverage the fact that you're not the first person. This isn't the first rodeo, even if it's your first rodeo. What would you say to that?
I think that's probably a current weakness of the Stoic Fellowship, although it has been brought up to some degree. I used to have one-on-one sessions with people who are interested in forming groups in order to discuss things. Kelly's has now kind of taken over a decent portion of that and is running much more frequent facilitator online meetings. I did it twice a year previously. And one of the things I tried to do was to ask whether any problems have come up in the group, and then people can discuss and share. So having live conversations is one way to do it, and the Stoic Fellowship is in process doing that right now, thanks to the leadership of Kelly's. And then in addition to that, there can be kind of written wisdom, although one thing we want to kind of work on is making sure that we can notify new as well as current facilitators that exists, and that it's consolidated and easy to navigate format so that they know that such a resource exists, where to find it, and that it's easily navigated in order to find the specific tips you need, rather than being long walls of text that people generally won't read. So that is something that has been discussed and is on the plate, but we don't fully cater to that, in my opinion, yet, and hopefully we will in the future, so more people can kind of share experiences in a more rapid and reliable format.
That gets to one thing I was going to ask about. Natural segue into what the Stoic Fellowship could be doing for facilitators in the future. I was going to save that, but since you brought it up, like, this is all kind of a work in progress, and a lot of progress has been made. But as one of the co-founders and someone who's been in this space for a while, do you have a vision of what you're hoping would be the actual resources and kind of interaction with facilitators and among facilitators, I don't know, 5, 10 years down the road? Is there a better version of this that you have in mind, and what would you like to see?
Yeah, in terms of leadership, I'm tend to be a little bit loose on the specifics of vision, because people's needs pivot, and I don't necessarily have the best pulse on needs. And so once a year, when people renew their membership for the Stoic Fellowship, we do ask what are the top goals that you'd like us to do. And we're an all volunteer organization who has pretty much or very close to no money. So we don't like pay anybody, or none of us are full time or any of that. So we're all doing this in our spare time. So things sometimes go a little slow. However, one thing we are making progress toward is one of the main goals was people wanted basic Stoic theory courses, as well as certification for some Stoic groups, so that if the facilitators of that group show a basic competence in both group facilitation as well as Stoic theory, they will have a certified badge and be promoted on our site as like a certified STOA, that they meet basic criteria. That way people can perhaps pick and choose a little bit more clearly what's going on. So that's one thing we have implemented. In terms of going forward, I think I don't have many specifics besides trying to keep a pulse on what people want, doing our best to execute, and probably going along in the spirit of what the Stoic Fellowship mission is, which is to grow, foster, and connect Stoa around the world. As long as we keep on that mission, the specifics I leave up to the membership and people's opinions. And so if you have any specific ideas, you're welcome to reach out to us and let us know. And even better, if you're willing to put some volunteer time into helping to organize that, because we're all volunteer organization, and your time matters in getting things done.
Definitely. I organize, thank you for the answers so far. And, I also organize a Stoic camp, but this is walking. Actually, I'm rethinking that part because, the walking, the effort, maybe, the part we dedicate to talking about Stoicism could be longer if we are just staying in one place. So I am curious, and I hope one day I can participate in the Stoic camp that you and Massimo BDUC organize. So far, I haven't been able to travel. I hope maybe next year. But understanding more or less how it works, what moved you to organize this camp, and maybe I don't know how long you have been doing this camp, and maybe some lessons you have learned from this, or some practices that you have implemented there that could be interesting to implement at the STOAs. I don't know if there's some of the lessons or knowledge you have gotten from this experience that could be suggested to the Stoas?
Yeah, I mean, I could explain what we do and have done. So all the Stoic, haven't been very many Stoic camps. I think New England Stoics, if I remember correctly, may have done some camp previously, and then Rob Coulter, which is the original Stoic camp, and then Massimo's and mine, which I think it's in its 8th year. But overall, the camps all approach things differently. And again, I think that's fine because we don't know best practices. The common thing is that like they're at least a few days. They're all in person. During COVID, Massimo and I tried a Stoic camp online, and we both considered it a failure. It did not engage and have the same dynamics. I mean, a lot of the time of Stoic camp, at least in Stoic camp in New York, is a lot of the valuable time is spent not in seminar. One thing that we learned and got feedback from was early on in Stoic camp, we tried to fill the time with all material. So people were in rooms for a while. And our feedback was that they didn't like that for the most part. They wanted free time. We book a event space in upstate New York that has a nice grounds, and there's a kitchen, so we don't have to cook and things like that. Stoic Camp Wyoming is a little more rustic in my understanding of things. But we're in a cabin, and so a lot of our time is spent like common meal time together, as well as social time. We have a social, explicit social hour, as well as time to go explore the surrounding town of an area of the Hudson Valley for people who want to do that. So overall, having social time because we're all in person is a big part of how we do it. We also kind of generally focus on the basics of Stoicism. We don't get advanced usually, but it's usually deep dives. How we present it is it's always an intensive introduction to a topic of Stoicism or related to Stoicism. So we've done deep dives on Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and we also have done a couple of years where we looked at the inspirations for Stoicism. So we looked at how Stoicism was created by looking at its influences in terms of cynicism, Megaric philosophy, and Plato's Academy at the time. Zeno's founded Stoicism. So in another year, we took a look at ancient competitors to Stoicism, going over some of the more interesting practicable philosophies like Epicureanism, Cyrenaicism, Pyrrhonian skepticism, and things like that. So we vary the topics for Stoic camp. It's a nice environment overall. That we've tried it once and have been a repeat attendees ever since for a location we found. And also we found that over time, about like 60% of the people who come to Stoic camp are repeat attendees as well. They just like the experience. And it seems like we're attracting enough people who really enjoy what we're doing, which is now a rotating topic that is deep but not broad, but it gives a basic overview. So we're not like going into a nitty gritty topic in too much academic detail. And we allow a lot of time for socialization and free time. And between that seems to be a successful formula. And we also, a big thing is capping it. We usually cap it in enough to fill a cabin at the campus we attend. And depending on whether people want single or double rooms within that cabin, or lodge, it's like between 16 and 20 people, and anything more than 20 people, we definitely cap it. And so having limited attendance we found to be useful. Otherwise it becomes more of a seminar than or like a lecture than a discussion. So that's our main takeaways. But we're like Stoic camp is not a trademarked thing. You can just form your own Stoic camp, and then maybe if you're a member of the Stoic Fellowship, you can help. We can help advertise it. I also am on the advisory committee for Modern Stoicism, and I run their events calendar. So if it passes basic muster, we can put it on. Everybody else on Modern Stoicism agrees, I can put the event on the events calendar for additional kind of publicity. So you're welcome to try your own and reach out to me. Rob Coulter, I'm sure, would be happy to answer questions, and Kelly's may as well. So if you're interested in trying your own hand at a Stoic camp, large or small.
It does seem like that would help build that kind of sense of community, I wanted to ask about, like, you mentioned, having meals together and that social time together, and Kelly's was talking about, going on these walks together, and like the year-long commitment to attendance, just to be dealing with people that you get to know. I don't know if there's more, like, obviously that kind of community building is an important aspect of this beyond just like going over content and curricula together, like it's you're doing it with people, and there's a bit of a interpersonal aspect to this. I mean, you've mentioned already a few of the ways in which the groups you've run have tried to foster that. I don't know if you have any other particular thoughts on, I mean, the importance of that versus just, going over Marcus Aurelius's meditations together, like doing events deliberately to build that sense of community with the people that you're doing it with. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's important, but like a lot of things I've said, there are no clear best practices, and we're kind of building as we go along. And if you look at ancient Stoicism's history, there was like it moved through different phases or was presented in different ways. There was meeting on a public porch is how it started, and some people in New York City Stoics for the in-person group have kind of commented that it's sort of in that spirit. We meet in indoor, outdoor public fora, and we've had people like literally wander by, listen to what we say, and then kind of join the group afterwards, which I think is very in the spirit of like the painted porch of Stoicism, because that's how it rolled. But then you had some more formal stuff later on. You go through Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius had private tutors, but that's not something we're particularly moving toward in New York City Stoics. And then you had like schools, the school of Epictetus, but that was kind of like a grooming academy for male Roman elite. So that's not something we're necessarily moving toward either at New York City Stoics. But generally, we're kind of using more modern models like peer support, something I brought up earlier. But that's kind of my thing and what I'm experimenting with. But overall, those are the approaches. But I think it's still an open question.
So I wonder also, like, in the spirit of like learning from each other, you've talked about some things that you have done in your groups that have worked. I wonder if there are any lessons to be learned from things that really didn't work. Could do any experiences of yours come to mind of things you tried? I mean, I think you mentioned one with Massimo, that sort of the online camp that kind of ended up, being deemed, I guess failure is a strong word, but I think that's the word you used. But like, are there other lessons to be learned from things that just didn't pan out the way you hoped?
Sure. So, recently in New York City Stoics, just for the past couple of months, I have been trying a couple of practical experiments where we do a specific practice, and I only have a few in pocket. I just wanted to kind of see how it goes. I tried one experiment twice, which was based off of an Epictetan suggested exercise of going around, just kind of walking around New York City and then coming back, and trying to take a note of people's upsetness in the world as well as your own, and say, is what they're upset about or is what I'm getting annoyed about up to me or not? It's not, away with it. And just practice that repeated application of Epictetus's fundamental rule, which is called by many the dichotomy of control, although I think that is a problematic way to summarize it. So I borrow from Massimo, who's been more recently calling it the fundamental rule, which I think is better. Of, is it up to me? Is it not? If it's not, away with it. So that was one that I tried. It was very low attendance, but I also moved location, so I can't really tell which variable played the main role there. But only one person showed up, and they're relatively new to Stoicism. So we just spent the conversation doing that. I also tried a graveyard walk to contemplate our own mortality. I had some experience in kind of in some Buddhist techniques around like death meditation and stuff like that. So I thought I would we'd go to a nice graveyard and walk around and contemplate that and talk about death, however it rained. And so always have a backup for if you're doing outdoor stuff, which I did, though I didn't scout the backup, and that was a problem because it was tiny and hard to deal. So that's another kind of trap that I fell into. The third one was kind of interesting, the experimental practice group. I took Ward Farnsworth's The Practicing Stoic, which had a nice little section and series of quotes from Political Action. And I had an experimental group where each person presented their own political action item that is important to them. And I laid ground rules saying we're not going to critique this person's political viewpoints. The only ground rule is like don't call for like murder or genocide or violence or anything like that. But outside of that, you could do what you want. And so each person went around in a circle, said, here's my political cause that I'm into, and here's an action you can take if you're into it, which you don't have to because it's optional. And that was actually, we had like a good like 6 to 8 people there, and people tended to have things. And interestingly, like I learned about a cause from somebody else that I donated to and then joined an organization, and now I'm kind of in communication with them. So that was actually pretty fruitful, and that was something that was successful. But I could see the failure mode, getting back to your question, of like letting people kind of go off and having it fall into a debate format. And that gets into another common failure mode and thing that I try to avoid as much as possible, which is for every meeting having a topic that anchors the meeting. Generally, I find free conversation to often meander off topic, and it can get pretty messy. And also, it can sometimes get upsetting to other people when people get on their own cause that has nothing to do with Stoicism. For my open discussion groups in New York, I just keep it on Stoicism, and people are roughly okay discussing. It's okay to discuss things that are personal for them as long as we can get it back to Stoicism. And that often works. But it does require some facilitation skill, so that if people start talking about a politician they dislike, they don't just start railing on the politician and how evil they are. Instead, they say, I get upset about this, and I am looking for Stoic techniques to try to help process that. Then that opens the conversation to a more fruitful direction. But not having an anchor point and allowing free-flowing conversation can... Is that necessarily a problem? That depends on your goals. If you think free-flowing conversation that's not related to Stoicism fosters community and it's going well for you, then that's fine. For me, that's not what I'm looking for. But again, this is part of the whole your goals determine your metrics for how successful your group is. Because if your group has different goals than my group, and then the better outcomes will look different for both of our groups because we're trying to do different things. But for me, trying to kind of teach Stoicism and learn more Stoicism myself, keeping it anchored on a specific topic, either a reading or a specific idea related to Stoicism, or a general topic like, what does Stoicism say about anger? Those are all methods to allow the group to stay on topic and to be able to converse fruitfully, where fruitfully is dependent on the goal. So yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, well, from my side, I think I have covered like most of the, the questions or things I had in mind to ask you. And, for me, I always go back to the question, like, how, well, through my practice, I've been able to develop some habits and, practice. And I, sometimes maybe I don't write every day, but almost every day, right? So, and I am always looking for ways to help people at the Stoa Madrid, for example, right? To develop this habit. And it's always the same thing, like, oh yeah, well, writing the journal is fine, but for some reason they don't do it, or they don't read every day, or so. I don't know if you have any maybe tips or tricks or something that you could recommend us as facilitators to help them. For example, what I do actually in the first part of this year, I started doing meetings in the morning at 6 in the morning. So I woke up in the morning and I did my stretches with the group, and I read with the group, and I wrote everything with them. But, it's hard for everybody to wake up early and so on, right? So it didn't work in the end. It started working, but I was happy, and then, oh, I couldn't wake up, or it's too early for me, blah, 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 and then it died. So I've been doing my best, but I haven't found like this some ways to help them better. I know it's up to them, it's up to everybody, but maybe as facilitators we can somehow, I don't know, cheer them into the thing or keep the attention up? I don't know. Maybe you can help us.
Sure. So I guess there are two ways to kind of handle things like when what you suggest fails. The first way is to say this is not a good technique or method or time of day of meeting or whatever, and just change it. Notice it and change it. That's one direction, and that could be useful. Another possible useful direction is to, if you, especially if you have some rapport with the group, where somebody's coming repeatedly and you know the person a little bit, you can actually troubleshoot why it failed with them. So for instance, like if it's like, let's journal for a month, if they accepted that ahead of time, and one other thing I actually do is to kind of ask for pre-commitments on that. So like it's clear, like when I run my New York City Stoics general discussion meetings, it's very clear that I assign the practice as just optional. I'm not like saying you have to do this. It may not be applicable to your life. You may not like it. You may not want to practice at all, and that's fine. So I label it as optional. But if you want people to drill something, that expectation should be set out ahead of time, saying, hey, we are here to get a practice that we are all going to practice for the next month. And then explicit public commitment can be a way of doing that. And then saying, so let's go around the circle at the end of the meeting and say what we got from the group, and also explicitly whether you're going to commit to something and how to do it. And so that is another thing, public commitment, as well as perhaps having people talk through at the previous meeting how they are going to commit to it. Have a plan beforehand, because one way it could fail is that they're like, yes, journaling's great, but I don't know how to do journaling, or I don't have the time for it, I forget. It depends on the person. And so if the person has a plan, you could at least look at how the plan failed, and also that they're explicitly committed to it. Maybe you just kind of maybe like a facilitator just threw the exercise out there with the expectation that people would do it, but that wasn't clear, nor did people want to, in which case that's fair that they didn't do it, because it wasn't clear that they should do it, and perhaps they didn't want to. So having that explicit commitment, having people have a plan for how to execute, and then a follow-up the following month, they're like, I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the time. And it's like, okay, well, let's expand on that. Go to a specific time where you didn't journal and why didn't it occur. And you could kind of troubleshoot the specific steps that led to the failure. And it will vary depending on the people. But one general trick for facilitators that I suggest is having people focus on a specific day where they know they failed. So instead of saying, I just failed, I just didn't have the time. That's a general hypothesis. That is not exactly why it failed. So I'm like, all right, well, remember a time where journaling came to mind, and you didn't do it. Can you think of a time? And let's presume they say yes. Then it's like, okay, well, what specifically happened then? Oh, well, I wanted to journal at night, but it came to mind at 11 p.m. and I was tired of getting ready for bed. And so I was like, I'm too tired for this. It's like, oh, okay, well, you're too tired for it because it was late at night. Can you do it in a different time of day? Or use some common habit forming tricks like chaining to something that you already do. And so, for instance, you could make it a habit that if you brush your teeth every night before going to bed, you will journal immediately after brushing your teeth. That way you're chaining it to a behavior you are already good at and you reliably do, so that it becomes kind of hooked to that behavior, and that increases the chances that you'll actually do it. And so troubleshooting failures in specific ways can also help. So those are some general tips to try to help people be a bit more reliable.
One more thing I tried last year, it was like exercising as Seneca did, right? Like he wrote to his friend wrote to him, having this letter coming back and forth. But it didn't work either, because people didn't want maybe to answer. They receive a letter and then answering. So maybe it's not in our culture, right? Sending letters to each other. So I'm going to try again, because I think it's a good way to apply Stoicism to something personal or something somebody else is telling you. By the way, everybody was using nicknames, so nobody knew. Only I knew, because I was the one delivering the letters, because I didn't find the technology to do it. But yeah, like applying Stoicism to a real problem, But in the end, it didn't. I don't know, it didn't sink. People didn't find it useful, or they didn't find the time to write to a stranger. Maybe it's part of this culture we have now, we don't put a face to it, or we don't want to open our problems to somebody we don't know. So what
Yeah.
do you think?
I mean, it could be any of those. And one possibility, again, is yeah, whatever the reason, it's just not working. And so you're welcome to move on to something else. That is often, sometimes a wise way to do things that simply are not working out. But the other possibility, it really depends on why it failed. So you'd kind of have to dig into the details. Like, was this expectation explicit? Did people explicitly sign up for doing this thing, or was it just thrown out?
No, no,
Like,
it was. Everything is very explicit always, but yeah,
okay,
somehow.
okay, and
Also,
was
also I tried, like maybe they had like a partner. So this month, Miguel and Maria are practice partners. So they have to remind each other to practice, and they had to WhatsApp each other, right? Like, oh, remember this, remember that. What do you think? And that worked a little bit better, maybe because there was somebody you had to write to somebody, and the person was waiting for your message. I don't know. What do you think would work?
yeah,
What
I'm
has worked for you?
in that specific circumstance, I don't have any experience in that kind of stuff, but I would just encourage you to take note of the fact that hooking people up directly to have a partner of sorts seemed to have a better outcome. And so that seems to be the way to go for the future. But I don't know the dynamics of your specific group in terms of like, do they necessarily know each other? Do they get to choose? Is it assigned at random? So maybe people get uncomfortable about the person they were assigned with because they just don't know them. There are a lot of possibilities. I would just recommend the general technique of troubleshooting a little further if you think you can, and if not, just simply noting that the WhatsApp thing worked better than the anonymous distribution method, and then just use that kind of method going forward.
Exactly. Thank you.
So two more things I'd like to ask you about if you still have the time, that I've come across in the group I run here. One is trying to encourage a wider range of people. Just kind of demographically, there's tends to skew kind of middle-aged for one, like a wider range of ages. Sometimes it skews male, and people's backgrounds and ethnicities and all of that. And I just, less in I personally would like our group here to be more diverse, not as a defensive thing to like avoid being perceived a certain way, but just because I want a wider range of people, more experiences, more backgrounds, more, this is just more interesting that way. It's more fun that way. Um, I don't know if you've had much experience with that in the groups you've run, and if is there anything you've tried doing that kind of helps to reach people of different sort of like demographics, for lack of a better word, you have any tips on that, or is that a thing you've encountered?
Yeah, it's not a thing I've really paid much attention to because I've been kind of trying to do the very small selective stuff that I want to do in a group. And so I'm fine not trying to grow. I just like let it happen. And I'm in New York City, so I've gotten like more women on average than I think some other groups have, and people of color and stuff. And I'm a person of color. So like, it's like, it works. But it's not something I'm familiar with.
Gotcha. Okay, then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was just the experience that I'm sure a lot of facilitators have had of, you start a group and it's going well for a while, and then, 6 months later, 12 months later, 2 years later, like, keeping the wheel turning and keeping the planning going and running the thing. And often people are doing it by themselves as a kind of like they're the solo operator or the facilitator of the group. And I've noticed in myself, like there are times when it becomes a bit of a grind and I start to kind of burn out on doing it. I wonder if you've ever experienced that, and if there are like any practical tips you have to sort of help combat that sort of sense of like burnout and the the Sisyphean task of keeping it going.
Yeah. So overall, I haven't had a problem of in terms of material. I think so. We're on our 11th year now, and I still haven't repeated it material except for like one specific thing. I think we covered the Euthydemus twice in New York City Stoics, and I did that explicitly because a section of that is so core to Stoic theory, in my view. But yeah, I haven't experienced like material because like my approach from the reading group perspective is like there's just so much out there. And since I'm interested in Stoicism, I find a new book that says something that seems interesting, or new academic papers or new blog posts or new videos. So like it always comes, and I actually try to rein myself in by having themes for the year, which I've done for the past several years. So it's at least a little more focused. Right now, we're doing academic papers, and I think I'm probably going to do a second year of that because there's so many I still want to cover. So in terms of material, if you do the reading group approach, reading and discussion, that is great for new facilitators for a few reasons. First of all, that's how I started out, that you don't need to know anything about Stoicism besides where to find a good book that other people would like. And that's pretty easy. You can Google it or ask an AI nowadays, and it'll give you, well, an AI may hallucinate, but you can Google it and you can get some basic titles to work through. And I lightly recommend doing non-primary sources to start so you get an orientation. And otherwise do whatever interests you. And that's my second tip, is that at the end of the day, you're the one running the group. So if you are doing things for other people exclusively and you're not interested in it or not attached to it to some degree, then that increases the risk of burnout. So run the group that you want to run. And that's kind of why I personally don't care about growth, because that's not my goal. I want to run the group I want to run. And if nobody shows up, then I'll stop the group and be done with it. But at least I tried and I got some knowledge along the way by trying to prep for the group. And that's kind of the attitude I suggest for new facilitators to take, to run the group you want to run. Do you want to talk about modern politics from a Stoic perspective and just have open discussion? And is that your passion? Good. And then do that. Do you want to do a reading group? Good. Do that. Do you want to just go on a hike and meet new people and maybe I mention a Stoic idea here and there to ground? Good. There's a group in California that literally just, like, one of their main things is hiking around a lake, stopping at a point and reading Marcus Aurelius, and then moving on and hiking again. There's so many ways you can do it. And so what works for you, focus on that. That decreases burnout. Secondly, I encourage new facilitators to know when to quit. In especially not population dense regions, there will be times where you simply will not have enough attendance. And enough depends on the goals. Like, one person can be enough for you, or maybe you want 20. And if you don't get 20, it's not enough for you. Again, that comes back to setting goals for your group ahead of time. But if you're not meeting your goals, know when to quit, but do it ahead of time. Do kind of Odysseus contract, tie yourself to the mast so that the siren call doesn't pull you off at random. And this is part of practicing Stoicism. Part of the discipline of action is to, for each action you do, have a justifiable, clear reason. That's a key part of appropriate action in the discipline of action generally, is to have reasons for what you're doing. So you're practicing Stoicism by doing this, saying, like, and setting like a clear cutoff point, saying, I'm starting a new group, and for 3 months, if less than 2 people come, if I only get 1 person, then I'm going to quit. And then you know what to do. But in terms of burnout, a final thing is, like, sometimes you just need to take a break. That's fine. If your group has been running for a while, you can partner with other people and have them run group as they want and see how they do if you need to keep it going. People don't generally disappear if you go away for a few months, I found. They'll come back when I come back, and that's fine. And I've taken a few month-long breaks. I've taken winter breaks when New York City Stoics was meeting only in person. And I take breaks when I'm traveling or when I have too much to do. For my in-person groups, I've been meeting less frequently now because it takes more effort and time for me to go out there and be present at a specific location. So, and I'm even a little behind on my planned timing for my online reading group right now. So, you're doing this on your own time. And if it's too much, then cool, take a break. Not a problem.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, yeah, Greg, thank you so much for your time. I know we're kind of getting past the 1 hour mark here. Is there anything else that's come to mind to you that you'd like to mention? Anything we didn't bring up?
Yeah, I mean, just probably in general, like, if you are interested in starting a Stoic group, like, reach out to us. We have a contact button. We have an online community. Talk things through with us. We're just here volunteering to try to help you grow stuff. But I guess the biggest thing is for new facilitators who are like, I don't know enough about Stoicism, that's exactly how I started out. Do a reading group and just read with others. And all you have to do is prepare a couple of questions that you think would be interesting to hear from others, or questions you yourself had. You're like, I don't understand this thing. Do you guys? Just a list of a few questions for a small chunk of reading could get you years of material. And that's all you have to do. Read the thing ahead of time, come up with some questions. And that is like a great way to start. And you won't run out of material for years if you do that and you meet monthly. For existing facilitators who are somewhat struggling, like having a cutoff point is a good idea. Like maybe it's not right for me, but also knowing that perhaps you could expand into live meetings online where you can get more people in the area, or and do like a special group. We have a concept which is a little hidden on the site called the oikiosis group, which is also a technical name that makes things confusing, but essentially a specialty group. If you want to have like a Stoicism and leftist politics or rightist politics group online in the United States, you can just form that group, and people who are interested in that specific thing can come and see it. Or Stoicism and volunteering, like let's all go volunteer and talk about how our volunteerism is going, or Stoicism and whatever you want, coping with family illness. There's so many different ways of kind of going about that to form like specialty groups, and online will spread your reach. And then for established facilitators, I guess keep on keeping on and hope you're getting something out of it.
No, that's great. Well, this has been great, Greg. Thanks so much. For people who might want to learn more about you and perhaps your books and all of that, is there a place you would point them to?
Yeah, my bare bones personal website, greglopez.me, although gregorylopez.me works too, is where you can find the basics of all the stuff I do.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.